Order. The member for Wright has the call.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to add my contribution to the discussion on the matter of importance, in particular the failure of the government to properly manage the budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, this budget comes down to simply who do you trust? As a nation, who do we best trust to run the economy? Now, what we've been hearing is a rhetoric from the government with reference to a delivered surplus or delivering a surplus. But guess what? The reality is, with reference to this delivered surplus, is that it's a budget with a forecast next year for a budget of $1.5 billion. So they haven't actually delivered a budget, but that's the rhetoric and the spin. The spin doctors of Labor are better than ours. They will have you believe, through some of the speakers, that they've actually delivered a budget. The reality is that in the next couple of weeks, we will actually get to see the effect of Labor's forecasting with the real deficit that they will produce. Now, I'll take you back a little bit, back to 2010-11 in the MyEFO docs, and in the next couple of weeks, the Labor government forecasted that they would be looking at a $12 billion deficit. A $12 billion deficit. Then in 2011-12, in the budget, they revised those figures to 22.6. That was just 12 months ago. And then we had the MyEFO budget 6 months ago for the 11-12 MyEFO. They revised their deficit figures again to $37 billion. Who knows what the deficit's going to look like? I'd say well in excess of $40 billion. So when you look at the government's capacity to accurately forecast a figure into the future, be it a surplus or whatever it is, you need to understand and have a look at their credibility and their track record of effectively being able to forecast. And on those figures, when it comes to dealing with the deficit or a potential surplus, they do not hit, and they could not hit the side of a barn with a forecast. You'll also hear them make the comment, the Labor government make the comment about the fastest fiscal consolidation in history. Well, with the four largest deficits that this government, record deficits that they've produced, I use the analogy that a fiscal consolidation, for those of you that may not understand what it is, it's capacity for a government to pay down debt. I would suggest that the fiscal consolidation that you're going to see is that similar to a contestant going on The Biggest Loser and whacking 50 kilos on before they go onto the show in order to rip it down a lot quicker. The amount of spending that this government has undertaken and left us in a massive debt with, of course, when those programs come off, is going to assist the government with reference to talking about their fiscal consolidation. But again, it comes back to trust. And this budget is about trust. It's about whether or not the nation can trust this government. It's whether or not the people of my electorate can trust this government. It's whether or not the mums and dads, hard-working, who are suffering under the cost of living pressures. It's the business houses who are struggling under, what is it now, 26 new taxes. And they talk about that they're representing families and that they've given a budget for families. If you want to help families, get your hands out of their pockets. Stop taxing them. 26 new taxes, unprecedented. When it comes to farmers, they're copying it as well, and I've got a number of them in my electorate. Trust the budget assumptions, and then the government goes on and asks us to trust them with their assumptions in the forecast they have for their 1.5 surplus. Now, when you make your assumptions on the top of a resources sector peak, and commodity prices are starting to come off, you leave yourself vulnerable as a nation with reference to trying to find the coin. So if you go back and have a look at this government's track record, the way they will try and create this illusion of a surplus, which I really personally don't believe will happen, will be through a process of cooking the books. But when it comes to trust, who can forget the Prime Minister of our nation before the last election staring down the barrel of a camera and saying there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead? Who can forget that? And when you're working out who you can trust, can you trust this Prime Minister? But don't let the Treasurer get off scot-free. Do not let the Treasurer, who has put this budget up, get off scot-free, because within hours, days of the Prime Minister making that comment, he was also asked with reference to the carbon tax, and his comment was, we've made our position very clear. We've ruled it out. So here you've got a Treasurer with a track record of not being able to be trusted, walking into this parliament, delivering a budget which talks about some hypothetical surplus in the future, and trying to convince the nation that they are worth trusting. Well, I employ this nation to think very hard about who they trust when it comes to the management of the economy. I want to now speak briefly about the off-book expenditure and the tricks that this government will use to try and create the illusion of a surplus. And I'll try and bring it back into a business sense. So an off-budget expenditure, for example, that the government are using is the NBN, around $36 billion, and then the Clean Energy Fund, which is about 10, which is $2 billion a year over 5 years. So when you look at the way that they're doing, it'd be the equivalent of someone in a family budget, not eating, showing on their balance sheet that they didn't eat for the whole year, but they bought a big wedge of groceries and stuck it in the pantry for the first half of the year, and in the second half of the year they'll go and do another grocery run. It is accounting trickery, and it is deceit shown by this government. The government talks about the cash rate and it was lower under Howard. I want to make the point as a business owner and encourage Labor to go and talk to their businesses and go and talk to those people with mortgages. And I'm surprised that you're going to find out that no one can borrow money at the cash rate. So yes, while you make the point that the cash rate may be lower under Howard, what we need to really focus on is the spread and what the variable rate is. And I can assure you that the variable rate under this government doesn't come anywhere near what we had it under Howard. The spending ratio is a percentage to GDP instead of the tax to GDP. Again, these are just tricks and illusions. No, spending as a ratio of percentage to GDP instead of tax. So the point I want to draw your attention to is your spending to GDP. The Assistant Treasurer recently made a comment on Sky that running the budget wasn't that dissimilar to running a household budget. And with the full record deficits, could you imagine buying an $800,000 home, not making a payment on it for the first 4 years, and then going in the fifth year and saying, listen, I'd really like to service some of my debt, and I've got $2.60 to give you. Because basically that's what it comes back to as a percentage when you start looking at the 1.5 potential surplus that may eventuate in the future to start drawing down some of these record deficits that this government is continuing to bash us around the head with. I cannot lose the opportunity of speaking about the debt ceiling increase from $250 billion to $300 billion. Today we were advised in the House that we need to just have a buffer. We need to have a buffer. Well, did we need to have a buffer when we took it from 150 to 200? Did we need to have a buffer when we took it from 200 to 250? But guess what? They're saying they're not going to draw down on that. They're not going to draw down on it. They just need it there as a buffer. But when you go and have a look at the budget forecast, they've actually taken a provision for the interest to service that debt into the future. In 2015, they are making provisions for interest on that debt, which they try and tell you that they're not going to draw down on. Who can you trust? Who can you trust?
Not the government.
When it comes to this government, when will they learn that you cannot tax and legislate a nation into prosperity? Madam Deputy Speaker, in closing, I just want to quickly make a quick comment on the AAA credit rating. When Standard & Poor's and Moody's give credit rating assumptions for nations around the world, what they give us a thing called a comparative rating. Now, why is it that when we were in government and we had money in the bank, no debt, and here we have a nation with unprecedented debt and very little capacity to service with structural deficits, as the other nations around the world soften, because with the comparative credit rating, as other nations around the world soften, by default, Australia ends up with a AAA credit rating because it is unprecedented, unthinkable that this government would blow its own horn that they're managing the economy when they are producing record deficits, and I'll make the point that they're structural deficits.
25 seconds.
I'd also make the point in closing, electricity prices under this government are up 66% since Labor was elected, and gas prices up 39%, food prices up 11%, petrol prices are up 11%, education and health costs are up 25%. if I leave a message with the government, get your hands out of the pockets of mums and dads, get your hands out of the pockets of business and let them flourish.